Welcome, everyone, to another thrilling episode of LPA Presents. I'm your host, Matthew D. Rhodes, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by an extraordinary creator. Known for his groundbreaking work with the Tex Murphy books and game series, the incomparable Aaron Connors. How you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you, Matthew.
I must confess, my journey into the Tex Murphy series began in 2015 with the Tesla Effect. Yet I quickly found myself captivated by the series as a whole, so I bought every installment to fully grasp the depth of the saga. It truly is a remarkable series, one that has left a mark on the gaming landscape. Today, however, I have the distinct pleasure of delving into the heart of the series, uncovering its mysteries, its inspirations, and its enduring legacy, and who better to guide us through this journey than the creative genius behind it all? Are you ready to regale us with tales from your remarkable journey?
Yeah, it's a high bar, but you bet.
Your involvement with the Tex Murphy franchise spans both books and video games. What initially drew you to this unique blend of detective noir and science fiction?
Well, I have to give the credit to Chris Jones because Chris Jones had started the series before I got involved. So he had started it. He'd actually started it years before doing a home film, like an 8 millimeter film, which was called Tex Murphy. And then later on, when he and so he was working with at the time, were looking for a character to build a game around, they remembered this Tex Murphy character they'd come up with. And at the time, it wasn't really a sci-fi setting. It was more like a contemporary detective, and they called him the singing detective. It was very tongue-in-cheek. And then in the course of doing Mean Streets and the Martian Memorandum, he turned into more of a Blade Runner, Decker kind of character, but didn't really have a ton of personality. He was more just an avatar that was moving around the screen, and you'd have a few funny jokes here and there, but it wasn't fully fleshed out. When I got involved with the third Tex Murphy game, which was Under a Killing Moon, and we were going to be doing it for CD-ROM and doing full motion video, we knew we were going to have a character that had a lot more depth to him. And so when I got involved and Chris gave me the responsibility of kind of fleshing out the character and the stories, I just took what Chris had started and then put my own spin on it. So I think the defining characteristic was that he's a man out of time. He's someone who lives in the 2040s, but idolizes the 1940s and kind of models his lifestyle after that. It makes him very much an anachronism and quite relatable, for those of us who are fanboys and girls who, have our interests in a different time period or fantasy or sci-fi. We can relate to this guy who has, this idea that he doesn't really fit in with everybody else. And I think it makes him a very sympathetic character. So, so I don't know if that answers the question, but I was given an opportunity to work with an existing character and ended up kind of turning him into something that people related to.
It's actually your take on the character itself that's actually interested me in trying to write a noir of the 1940s, 1950s, somewhere around that time period. I mean, the way that the character presents himself as kind of like partial narrator, the way he's talking about the environment in some aspects just resonated with me.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a fun part of it, the way we ended up designing the game, where we loved having him make little comments about things. In fact, that was some of the most fun for me as a writer, because I would get a location from an artist, and I would tell them as a designer what needed to be there as far as gameplay, but left it up to the artist to kind of fill in the environment how they saw fit. And then it was fun to sit down and look at the environment as if I were Tex looking at it with fresh eyes, walking into a room for the first time. And so I would just wander around the room virtually and imagine what Tex would think about all these things. And that was so much fun to do. And I think it was kind of a unique aspect of our games that no one else was really doing, that gave it a very distinctive style.
There's some definite one-liners in there that really do pop. I mean, my favorite one, I kind of used it with you on the phone, was the PI breakfast comment.
Right. Yeah, one of my favorites was, I forget which game it was in, but Tex is out on the street and he walks past the old Bijou movie theater, which has been shut down.
Mm.
And they have some movie posters outside the theater, and one of them has a banner across it that should say "now playing," but it says "now laying," for the P is missing. And I was looking at it, I was like, okay, well, the obvious joke is some little sexual innuendo. But what I decided instead was for a text to say it looks like someone took a pee here. And that's still one of my favorite jokes, though.
Tex Murphy is a beloved character in gaming history. How did you approach translating his adventures from the books to the interactive medium, or was it the other way around?
That's a good question. So we already had some precedents for Tex because you had the two games prior. And as we were talking about before we started the interview, the two books that I wrote initially, Under a Killing Moon and Pandora Directive, were actually written in reverse order. So Under a Killing Moon, the game came out first, followed by the Pandora Directive. The Pandora Directive novel was actually written in between the two games. And so we adapted the story of the Pandora Directive for the game. And I think it gave the Pandora Directive a really solid narrative structure because it was a complete story independent of gameplay before we started development. And so a lot of people will say that the Pandora Directive is their favorite of the games in the series, at least to this point. But with Under a Killing Moon, I was still new to the process of game design, and so I was still feeling my way of how to tell a story in an interactive medium. Whereas Pandora Directive, I think actually I had gone through the process now and was comfortable with it, and so that really gave me a good experience with blending both the game aspect and the story aspect.
I still need to try and get my hands on the books. The series has just become so iconic to me.
I might be able to help you out with that.
As a creative director and story director, you've shaped the narrative of numerous Tex Murphy titles. Can you share any memorable moments from the development process that stand out to you?
Oh man, there's so many. I would say the big thing for me was with Under a Killing Moon, going from floppy disk games to CD-ROM was such a quantum leap.
Mm-hmm.
And it freed us up. At the time, I remember having conversations saying, we've got this whole CD, what are we going to fill it up with? And then we ended up shipping the game on 4. And so it just was such an exciting time to be able to do the 3D engine because we developed our own 3D engine in-house. Now, of course, you just license it from any number of developers. So for us building that and actually being able to walk around in a 3D environment and then being able to compose these scenes where you have these live actors within that game environment was just thrilling. I mean, it's so hard to make people understand how incredible that was at the time. And I think that was really the big thing for me was just, I had always loved games. I'd loved board games when I was a kid. Really enjoyed creating this kind of fantasy world, and then being able to bring it to life was an amazing process. So Killing Moon was just so much fun to work on, so exciting, but a big learning curve, for everybody, because we were doing things people hadn't done before. And then when we got into the Pandora Directive, it was the best experience I think I've ever had working on a game, because we now had gone through the process. So we knew kind of what our limitations were and where we could kind of push the boundaries a little bit. And given what the technical limitations were back in the mid 90s, it still holds up surprisingly well. And I think that was really the thing is we felt that we were really creating a great game experience. And just being able to tell stories, I think doing the narrative pathing in Pandora, where you could choose a different path to follow and the game would turn out differently depending on your choices. These were all just really exciting, creative opportunities that are unique to that time period. The 90s were just a time of lots of growth and experimentation and so on. And it's just, it was an epic time to actually have that opportunity.
If I recall correctly, were you guys attempting to remaster or remake one of the original games, but lost all the footage?
It isn't that we've lost the footage. So the one that we've talked about remastering is the Pandora Directive.
Mm.
And we have all the original footage. In fact, almost all of that has been updated to 4K, and it looks just incredible. I mean, it's amazing. It literally looks like it could have been filmed yesterday. But that's only one aspect of doing a completely remastered game, obviously. We'd
Mm.
have to rebuild all of the game environments, redo all of the internal graphics, the inventory objects, things like that, which we're all capable of doing and doing much faster and better than we did at the time. But it's still a matter of manpower and budget. And so, unfortunately, at the moment, the people who are involved, the team members who are involved, who would be involved in bringing this out, are all working on their own separate, different projects. But I think we all agree that at some point down the road, we want to get back together and do that. So, but as far as I know, that's the only one that we've really seriously considered doing a remaster of.
I would love to start with Under a Killing Moon again. I keep running into an issue with the game right now where I'm locked in one particular location after finding all the clues, and the game seems to think I didn't find any of the clues.
Oh no. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with that.
The Tex Murphy series is known for its intricate plot lines and memorable characters. How do you ensure that the essence of Tex Murphy's world is captured faithfully in both the books and the games?
That's interesting too. So the difference between the books and the games, more than anything else, is that the games were reliant on technology to create a convincing world. And we did the very best we could, given the limitations at the time. But there's a bit of a B movie aspect to those games, simply because we weren't able to do movie quality graphics. We felt like a lot of the content, as far as the story, characters, dialogue, things like that, a lot of that was really good quality and could have been done at a high level with a movie or something like that. With the books, there are no limitations.
Mm-hmm.
It's just it's whatever my imagination is, and then being able to tell the story in a way that helps the reader be able to envision that world and buy into it and feel like it's a believable place. And so there are a lot of Tex Murphy fans that, as much as they love the games, and I love the games every bit as much as I love the books,
Mm-hmm.
they feel like the books are actually more faithful to the canon of Tex Murphy. So if you want to know, what the real story is. And the other aspect of that too is that the books only have one narrative path, and the
Right.
games can have multiple paths. And so the book ultimately determines what the real story is for a lot of the Tex Murphy fans.
And of course, when it comes to writing, you're getting more into the character's head and getting their understanding of the situation a lot better than you would, say, a movie or a video game where you're actually having to see everything portrayed physically.
Yes, and we do use a lot of internal monologue dialogue with Tex in the games, but not obviously to the extent of a first person narrative in a book. So the book is always told through Tex's eyes. Um, and yeah, so it is a little bit different in that way.
Now, Tex Murphy has a dedicated fan base that spans across various mediums. What do you believe resonates with the fans the most about Tex Murphy's adventures?
Um, well, it's interesting because it would be, I think it's a hard sell. It's a hard sell to the average person because you're combining a bunch of different genres that don't normally go together. You've got detective, you've got sci-fi, futuristic, dystopian, but then it's funny. There's some almost slapstick content in it. And then there's a lot of, for me anyway, I've always been obsessed with some of these historical elements. So Indiana Jones has a lot of that, where they have the object that people are looking for is something from the past that has a lot of power or whatever. So there's a lot of history involved, and
Mm-hmm.
whenever I reference history in the stories, I always try to base it on actual historical items and or a plausible story that took place in the past that you could, discover in Tex's present time. So it's all these different things together. So it's kind of a hard sell because people are like, I don't even really get what this genre is. And so what we decided when we were making the games was, let's make sure it's funny. That was kind of our number one thing, is if people are entertained by it and they're laughing and smiling through it, they're going to forgive a lot of those things that maybe aren't their cup of tea, So I know a bunch of people who've read my books that say, I don't really like science fiction, but I like your books. And that's because the science fiction is not really the whole focus of the story. It's just one part of it. And so I think that's really what has resonated with people, is that we created a main character, and then, supporting characters in a world that was entertaining more, first and foremost was entertaining. And you would find it funny and likable and relatable. And then the fact that Tex is the first person to make fun of himself, and he's not this, typical hero character, makes him very likable, and people can relate to him. So I think that's really the key to it.
I believe there was a subplot in the Tesla effect that I would have loved to actually seen more of in the story, and that was the pretext that possibly Tex Murphy was a man out of time.
Yeah, we Chris Jones and I discussed that at length, because there were a few different ways that could be interpreted and play out. And it's really interesting, because what it came down to was, how plausible do we want this to be, So, and I tend to err on the side of being a little more realistic with the storytelling. Chris is great because he loves sci-fi, especially old, B-movie sci-fi stuff. And so for him, it's more like, no, let's just go crazy with it, And so that particular one, I think, is a really good example, because on one hand, we talked about, well, is he actually someone who lived in the 1940s and was cryogenically frozen and then comes out of it? But because, for me, there were other characters that we knew for sure had gone through that process, and it had damaged them, like it had been, a very traumatic thing to go through. So for Tex to just somehow come out of it pristine would have required a lot of explanation, I felt. And it was better just to say, let's suggest that's maybe a possibility, but ultimately that's not what happened. But I will say, this is just a little bit of a teaser for anyone who's listening to this that's a Tex Murphy fan, is that the final story in the series, which is called Trans, don't know if it'll ever be made as a game or not, but it will definitely be a book. And I'm planning on having that out next year. It does go into this specific thing, and talks about what Tex's connection is to the 1940s. And it is a really legitimate connection. So anyway, that's something to look forward to.
The Tex Murphy series features a rich, interconnected narrative that transcends both books and video games. How do you maintain consistency and coherence across the different storytelling mediums?
Well, I would say the obvious answer is that I'm the one doing the writing. I think if you had a whole staff of writers and everyone's got their own different ideas, it might be a little harder to maintain the consistency. But the fact, number one, that I'm the one who's overseeing, at the very least, the writing of all of the different projects, whether it's games or books, but also that I've had an idea really from early on what the arc of Tex's storyline was going to be. So there are elements in every single story that have importance to how things are going to resolve at the end of the series. And so having just that game plan, I think, made a big difference.
You talk about playing around with the science fiction concept. Even one of my current books plays around with that concept. I'm actually hoping people will flock to it at some point. Tex Murphy's world is filled with futuristic technology and dystopian themes. How do you approach world building to create a vivid and immersive experience for readers and players alike?
That's a great question. It's interesting because I personally am not a massive sci-fi fan.
Hmm.
I've read a lot of sci-fi. Like when I was younger, I read the Dune series, I read Foundation, um, and I really enjoyed them. But my my deepest attraction was to detective stories, and so all of the Hammett Chandler stuff, Sherlock Holmes, and so my thing was really about solving mysteries, and so that's why I think when I came in, it became more detective-y than
Hmm.
sci-fi. But for me, the one thing is I wanted the sci-fi to complement what was going on with the character. And so it's not a completely unrecognizable world. And I think as we're getting into the 2020s, 2030s are not far away, and then it's the 2040s. Um, I think my argument with Chris was that the world is going to still be very recognizable in the 2040s. There'll just
Hmm.
be a few things that are radically different. And so one of the things is an example. When we did Under a Killing Moon, there was no internet.
Yeah.
Still hadn't happened. People weren't carrying cell phones around. I mean, you think about just those two things and how much that changed the entire world in, I don't know, 7 or 8 years. It went from no one having them to everyone having them. It's very difficult to be able to foresee what things are going to catch on and make that huge change and what things are going to be essentially the same as they've always been. So you look at clothes we wear now, they're not radically different from clothes we've been wearing all along.
Hmm.
Um, we do have drone technology, we have holograms. In our stories, we take advantage of those things. We have the flying cars because, again, flying cars are always seem to always be a part of science fiction. Um, and who knows, maybe in the 2040s we will have the flying cars. So we'll see how that works out. But yeah, other than that, it was kind of like the world is essentially the same with the exception of a few things. And so if we lean into those things and show how they've been incorporated into, day-to-day life, that sells the sci-fi aspect of it without having to, come up with this imaginative, completely different view of what life is going to be like in the future. So I don't know if that answers the question or not, but it was really just kind of let's pick and choose a few things that make our world really sci-fi and then kind of keep the rest of it really relatable.
Throughout your career, you've worn multiple hats, including creative director, story director, and lead designer. How do these different roles influence your approach to crafting Tex Murphy's universe?
Well, uh, the roles that I filled with Tex Murphy were very. Chris Jones and I shared like all the responsibilities for the creative process. So we collaborated on game design. Even though I did most of the writing, we would discuss story and plot with each other, and then I'd go away and do the actual writing. So I was wearing all of the hats when I was doing Tex Murphy. When I left Access Software and went to work with other companies, then it was much more, a specific role. So either just being a designer or just being a story director or just being creative director. But realistically, when we were doing the initial games, you kind of needed to do all of them together because everything was so interconnected.
Tex Murphy's humor is a hallmark of the series. How do you ensure that the humor translates effectively across different mediums while maintaining its authenticity?
That's an interesting question too because humor is so subjective.
Hmm.
I know for a fact that there are things I find hilarious that most people don't find funny, and so I need to run anything like that past other people to see, does this work for you or not. But Chris Jones is who plays Tex Murphy in the games is a very funny guy, just naturally. And as we got to know each other really well, what ended up happening was that I would have my funny thoughts and funny dialogue, but then I would combine it with his way of expressing himself.
Hmm.
Uh, and so, for whatever reason, that turned out to be this kind of magical combination, that I would put these words into his mouth and the way he would deliver them would just take him to another level. So, again, the humor really was very observational, right? It's I don't know. It's kind of hard to describe because I hate to overanalyze humor because it kind of takes the fun out of it. But I think it was just a combination of kind of being silly and a little bit childlike with occasionally some really smart intellectual observations. And then really overall, the biggest thing was not to take ourselves seriously. And so Tex is always kind of making fun of himself and how he has no idea what women are thinking. And they're always somehow, he's always a step behind with a lot of situations. And yet in the end, he ends up, somehow either coming up with something clever or lucking into it or whatever. And I think that relatability, that he's a funny guy who's just trying to make the best out of a situation, and we're all rooting for him, and we're also feeling like we're working with him to achieve this goal. And I think that's where the humor really works.
How well does that translate into actual text compared to being acted out?
That's a great question, actually, because it is so different. With the books, it's a really good example is that there are jokes that read very well on the page and do not read well when spoken out loud, and vice versa. In fact, I would say it's probably more common the other way, that there are a lot of ways you can speak a line, like the way you deliver the line is what sells the joke, and it may not come across as effectively when it's written down. So yeah, it's a combination, and it's funny because I think my favorite way of telling my stories is with my audiobooks, because it's my writing, and it's written the way I want it to be written, and I'm very, I'm someone who probably spends way too much time wordsmithing, but I say the line exactly the way I want it on the page, and when I'm reading the audiobook, I can deliver the line the way I hear it in my head. And if someone's just reading it, it's up to them, to how they interpret the reading of it. And so for some people, they may read the line and go, "Oh my God, that's hilarious," and other people may just go right over it and not really get the joke.
Right.
But if it's spoken, whether it's in the audiobook or by Chris's text in the game, there's no mistaking that this is a funny line.
Of course, the way that Chris portrays it, it's almost like he's being serious when he says it, and that's what makes it even funnier.
Yes, he's a great deadpan. I mean, and that's just something that he just has naturally. There are some actors who are just naturally funny, and others that aren't. That you can give them the most hilarious material and they can kill it because they just don't have that spark. And Chris definitely has the spark.
Tex Murphy Under a Killing Moon was a groundbreaking title that introduced full motion video to gaming. What were some of the challenges and innovations involved in bringing Tex's world to life in this format?
Well, a lot of what we were talking about earlier, which is the 3D world. It was such a unique thing, and up until then, the 3D worlds were either in shooters, like Wolfenstein was the one that was really popular while we were developing Under a Killing Moon, and graphics on that were very poor. I mean,
yeah.
I shouldn't say poor, but they weren't trying to portray a real world with real characters in them, right? And then you had Seventh Guest, which had great characters and really nice environments, but they didn't have a true 3D world. They had rendered paths, so it simulated 3D, but you didn't actually control it and go anywhere you wanted. So that was what our goal was. We said, let's see if we can have the graphics of Seventh Guest and combine it with the complete freedom of movement of Wolfenstein. And I think we did a really good job of it, considering what the limitations were at the time. And in fact, I remember we suggested on the box that people upgrade to 4 megs of RAM in order to get maximum performance. So we were working with some very serious constraints at that time. So the fact that you could walk around this room and sell the illusion that you were actually in this environment was amazing. That was tremendous. And then when you took these actors that we filmed and composited them onto the graphics of this 3D location, they just felt like magic, and granted, it's completely dated at this point, but at the time it was pretty revolutionary.
Dated or not, it's still entertaining, though a little hard to maneuver with sometimes.
Yeah.
The Tex Murphy series has experimented with different gameplay mechanics over the years. Can you discuss how these innovations have enhanced the storytelling experience for players?
I guess that's pretty subjective too, because we were always trying to find a balance between giving people as much freedom as possible in the game to explore and play at their own pace, but also have the story move forward and keep the pacing really good. And you see that in a lot of different games where it's one way or the other. So either it's completely open and you can get lost and forget what's going on in the story because you got off in the weeds, and um, then you have the opposite, which is probably more common, which is where the game designers decided to kind of take control away from the player to keep the movie or keep the story moving forward, and not allow them to get lost. And so that was a big thing for us. So all of the design elements were all part of that decision making. Like how do we keep them on track and give them at the same time the feeling like they are really controlling what's going on and can do pretty much anything they want. And so all of the things we put in as far as the look voiceovers when Tex looks at things, or how the inventory worked, or when we would trigger a cinematic. That was a big one, is that we would not just trigger a cinematic randomly. So you're out walking around, all of a sudden, boom, we take over and make you look at a scene for a long time. We always made it so that you had to accomplish something that was, took a bit of time and effort to achieve. And then the cinematic was then kind of a reward. It was like a dessert for these people that had put this effort into solving a puzzle or achieving some objective. So yeah, all the design decisions really just were focused on how do we tell the story in the best possible way, keep the pacing good, but keep people feeling like they're in control of the experience.
Tex Murphy is often compared to classic film noir detectives like Philip Marlowe and Sam Spade. Were these influences intentional, and how do they manifest in Tex's character?
Oh yeah, they were huge. I mean, he lives on Chandler Avenue, which is a nod to Raymond Chandler. So yeah, it's those were the books that I grew up reading, and I was obsessed with film noir. I loved The Maltese Falcon, was a movie I watched over and over and over again, and Chris Jones was the same. He was a huge film noir fan. We loved the Humphrey Bogart movies, and so yeah, that was a huge part of it. In fact, if you look at how Tex's character is in Martian Memorandum, he's wearing like this long overcoat, no hat, has this big gun. He looks like Deckard from Blade Runner. And when you see him in Under Killing Moon, the very first scene, he's got the loose tie, kind of rumpled. He's got khakis. He's got a tan trench coat. He's got the fedora. He's smoking a cigarette, which he didn't in the other games. So it was very intentional to pay homage to the classic detectives, but always keeping in mind that it's Tex who idolizes those characters, not us. So it's him saying, I wish I could have lived in the 1940s and been Sam Spade. And so that's really where the influence, how it comes out.
In the exploration, in order to get some of these cutscenes, the cutscenes are a major payoff. Like one of my favorite ones is when he's playing around with the gun and it gets dropped out the window, and that later comes back in a later scene.
Yeah, that's funny because that's right at the beginning of Under Killing Moon, and it's in his office. And so we wanted, because we knew this was going to be such a new game experience, it was going to be nothing like the two previous Tex Murphy games and not like really anything else anyone was doing. So we loaded that first location of Tex's office with lots of things to do and look at and interact with. And we were like, we'd be totally happy if everyone spends like the first hour of that game just looking around the office, because there's that much stuff to find in there. And the reason why we had that particular cutscene with the gun is that we didn't want him to have a gun in the game, because there were too many situations where just having a gun would get you out of the problem, right?
Right.
And so we're like, well, it makes sense he would have a gun, but we don't want him to have a gun as game designers. And so that's why we put that cutscene is we're like, okay, well, let's give him a gun and then have him immediately lose it. And so it ended up, and we when we came up with the idea, we all just laughed about it, and we're like, people are probably going to be pissed at us, but if we make it funny enough, they won't hold it against us. So That was the reason for that.
Tex Murphy Tesla Effect marked the return of the series after a hiatus. What was it like revisiting Tex's world and reintroducing him to both longtime fans and newcomers alike?
That was really fun because we had done Under a Killing Moon and Pandora back to back, and then the original plan at the end of Pandora was to go forward with a new story, which is actually going to be in the book that I'm releasing next month, called Tex Murphy and the Romanoff Enigma. It picks up right from the end of the events in Pandora Directive. And that was going to introduce us to this whole new storyline that was going to carry on for 3 more games. That was our original plan. And had the storylines for those 3 games all laid out. It was going to be super exciting and all of that. And as it turned out, we got an opportunity to do another project and have Intel pay for it. And Chris, who was not only Tex Murphy and co-designer, co-writer, all that, he was also the CFO of the company.
Mm-hmm.
And so for him, it was an opportunity he couldn't pass up. And so he came to me and he said, look, I know we wanted to do this new game, but can we do a smaller game and do it really quickly and get all this money from Intel? And so that's how Tex Murphy Overseer came to be. And Overseer, for those who are familiar with the Tex Murphy series, was a retelling of the basic story that had been in the initial Tex Murphy game way back in 1989, which was before I got involved. And so we ended up kind of sprucing that up and updating it, making it fit with kind of the narrative style we'd established with Under a Killing Moon and Pandora, and put that out as Tex Murphy Overseer. And then unfortunately, we had a big change in the tastes of the audience and the types of games that were popular, and we were bought out by Microsoft at that time, and they decided not to move forward with the traditional adventure games. So we never got a chance to do those other games that we had planned. But and now I've completely lost what your question was.
What was it like revisiting Tex's world and reintroducing him to both longtime?
Right. So getting to Tesla Effect. So what happened was this all happened around 2000, and Chris Jones and I, we always wanted to tell those other stories. We felt like the series was just really finding its feet and had got a nice following, and we'd gotten really great reviews. Pandora Directive had won Adventure Game of the Year, and so we felt like we had a lot more to offer, but unfortunately we couldn't get other people to buy into our vision of it and help us with the funding to develop these games. So the fact that Overseer came out in 1998 and it was 17 more years before we released the sequel, it was something that we had wanted to do for so long. And with the fact that we were using these live actors, we weren't able realistically to pick up from where we'd left off, because all these characters that we had in the previous games were going to come back in Tesla Effect. And you can't just jump 20 years in the future where everybody looks older and all of that and pretend that it was last week,
Right.
And so that required coming up with a story that would jump us into the future. And so I ended up coming up with, pretty much a brand new story just to accommodate that jump ahead in time. So the story of Tesla Effect was not originally going to be one of the stories that we had in mind for the 3 that would follow Pandora Directive. And so it was incredibly exciting, and obviously it was the kind of the advent of Kickstarter that allowed us to do this. And so had this amazing response from our fans, and it was a really amazing experience for us to be able to come out with something. And I feel like for the most part, it was quite satisfying for most of the people. And, after 20 years, it was great to see Tex again.
Yeah, it was during Tesla Effect that you brought back a lot of the older FMVs to go into Tex's mind. And that's what inspired me to actually go and get all the original games to see the actual story themselves, see where all these scenes had initially come from.
Right. Yeah, that's fun. I think it was part of the hope, was that it would at least, inspire people to want to look at what the other games had been. And even though they were older and, dated technologically. we felt like if you enjoyed the characters and the storyline, you'd still enjoy the story and characters from the earlier games. So, and I think that's happened quite a bit. You know, we have games on Good Old Games, GOG,
Hmm.
and people are still buying them every month. And so apparently people are still discovering Tex, which is really cool.
I actually got my copy through, or all my copies through Steam.
Oh yeah, yep.
Tex Murphy's investigations often lead him to uncover dark conspiracies and hidden truths. What inspires these intricate and suspenseful plot lines in both the books and the games?
Well, those, so that's just kind of what I find interesting. You know, I love historical mysteries. Again, like to me, Indiana Jones is a great reference for that. You know,
Mhm.
it's there's something really intriguing about a mystery that's been around for a long time, and it takes someone discovering something new to kind of reveal these, you know, mysteries from the past. And it fits really well with Tex because Tex is a man out of time. So time is a big time and memory are recurring themes with all of the Tex Murphy stories. So there's always something in every story that has a connection to something in the past, and then it's obviously set in the future. And yet you
Mhm.
have the main character who fancies himself as someone from the past. So yeah, all those components together, I think, make it kind of a unique, you know, narrative, and it's something that just appeals to me personally. So I just love writing those types of stories.
The Tex Murphy series has left a lasting impact on gaming culture. How do you think Texas Adventure has influenced the broader landscape of interactive storytelling?
I don't know if it has at all. I
You
mean,
don't think so?
I would love to think it has. The one thing I do know is I'll spare you all the details, but I had an opportunity to work for BioWare, and it was on the Mass Effect series, and I got to meet a lot of the creative team that worked on Mass Effect. And the one thing that it was interesting because, you know, having played Mass Effect, I remember thinking, boy, a lot of their interface is very similar to what we did, you know, and obviously they
Mhm.
came out after we did. And I remember just thinking, I wonder if they were inspired by us or if it was just a coincidence. And then come to find out that, in fact, uh, several of the members of the creative team were huge Tex Murphy fans and had played all of the games and would reference Tex Murphy games in a lot of their creative meetings. And that was a really cool thing for me, you know, was to know that I had my work or my design had been an influence on people that had made such an amazing series as Mass Effect.
Tex Murphy has faced a wide array of adversaries throughout his adventures. Do you have a favorite villain from the series?
Um, well, I like all the characters. I loved Jackson Cross in Pandora Directive. Barry Corbin played him, and I thought he did a really great job. Very sinister character. And I'm not sure if you really would refer to him as a bad guy, but in the Overseer game, I thought Michael York's character was pretty great. It was really amazing to have someone of his caliber, you know, as an actor, come in and not only want to be part of playing that character and being in the game, but being really serious about it. Like he came in and took it very seriously, knew all of his lines backwards and forwards, and just brought so much to that character. I think that's really the thing is I can write a character and feel like I have a good feel for it. But when an actor comes in and takes that performance to another level, that's pretty amazing for a writer. And so, yeah, maybe J. St. Gideon in Overseer is my favorite.
The Tex Murphy series has garnered a loyal following over the years. What do you think contributes to its enduring popularity across different mediums?
I think it's Tex, you know, more than anything else. I think, I mean, I've played with some ideas of putting out some maybe like interactive, some interactive games that are smaller and maybe more audio based,
Hmm.
because I feel like with Chris's voice and, you know, the stories we come up with and the style of writing and the humor, I think people would enjoy the experience of just hearing Tex and getting a story as much as anything else. I'm not sure most people played the Tex Murphy games because they love to solve, slider puzzles. I think it was really about Tex and the stories. And so, yeah, I think that's it. It's the humor, it's the relatability, and that would always be a part of anything that we do with Tex.
But puzzles aside, the visualization, the story was so rich and engaging in Tesla Effect, the way that you had done it. I mean, sure, you could walk around the environment, but it could have almost been an entire own movie.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't, I wasn't involved with the full production of Tesla Effect. I should just clarify that because at the
Mm.
time I was working for Electronic Arts, and it was actually kind of miraculous that EA gave me permission to share the script that I had written, because I had worked on the story prior to working with EA, and then the opportunity to work on Tesla Effect came up while I was at EA. And so I had to go to the HR department and say, hey, will you let me give them this thing that I worked on? And in most cases, EA would say no to that. And somehow they let me do it. But I was not directly involved in a lot of the gameplay and world creation. That was done with Chris overseeing it, and then another team of people. But I agree in me seeing it as an outsider, as opposed to the other games where I was directly involved in all of it. There were some spectacular, locations in that game, and it was very well done.
Okay. Lastly, what does the future hold for Tex Murphy, and what exciting projects can fans look forward to in the franchise?
The only thing I can guarantee is stuff that I can control completely. Chris and I have talked a lot about things we would love to do. Um, as I mentioned before we started our interview, Chris runs another company now, which has nothing to do with video games, and
Hmm.
he's very busy with that, and company's very successful. But I feel like it's kind of coming to its natural conclusion, and I would imagine in the next 3 or 4 years, he's going to get to the point where he's ready to start doing some other projects. And I know for a fact it's going to go back to the things that he is really passionate about, which are stories.
Hmm.
And so obviously we both love Tex, and it's very comfortable for us. And so I would imagine that he and I will probably collaborate on some things in the future. But the only thing I can say for sure is what I work on. So I have a new book coming out next month, which will be the fifth book in the series. And then there is a sixth book that will be there to kind of put a bow on everything. And then I'm considering the possibility of doing another book about Tex's adventure to Mars, which was one of his early cases. And got a couple of other ideas about maybe a choose your own adventure book that's Tex Murphy, and then maybe doing some interactive audio type games. So I have a lot of things that I have control over the development of that I promise will be out there over the next 2 to 3 years. And so Tex will continue on. There will be new stories. One of the stories is about how he finds his way to Chandler Avenue. You've got the story about him going to Mars. And then you've got the story of how the whole epic series ends up, and that's going to be a great one. So at the very least, there'll be 3 more stories in addition to the book that's coming out next month.
I actually look forward to them.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to you reading them.
Now, thank you for taking the time to share your insights with us today, Aaron. It has been an absolute pleasure to delve into the world of Tex Murphy and gain a glimpse into the creative genius behind the series. Your passion and dedication to your craft are truly inspiring.
Well, thank you so much, Matthew. It's very high praise. I'm not sure totally deserved, but I really do appreciate it.
To our listeners, if you found yourself intrigued by Aaron's journey in the world of entertainment, I encourage you to join us each month as we continue to explore the stories of industry professionals from all walks of life. Whether you're interested in acting, storytelling, authorship, game development, or beyond, there's something here for everyone. Who knows, perhaps one day you'll find yourself sitting right here with me, sharing your journey and inspiring others in your accomplishments. Until then, stay tuned for more episodes and remember to keep chasing your dreams. The sky's the limit. Thank you once again, Aaron. And to our listeners, until next time, stay curious and keep dreaming.